Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and a new guest joining the show for the very first time. It is Troy Chapman, and we'll try to get the order of different things that Troy brings to the table in regards to salary cap information. You work for overthecap.com. You are a great follow on Twitter X at Texans Cap. You have the Substack, which is Cap and Trade, and the YouTube, and it is all an absolute must for people to understand the salary cap better, which is going to be our main goal here, to talk about Vikings issues this offseason, dealing with the salary cap. But welcome to the show, Troy. Great to have you, and thank you for being a resource to help me constantly understand better what is going on in the NFL cap.
No problem, Matthew. Thanks for having me on. I'm a big admirer of your work as well, from all your YouTube work and the Substack. Substack's kind of gotten to be a pretty big thing. So definitely excited to be here with you.
Well, I appreciate that. And been kind of, if people don't know, actually still on the show because they're still finding it on YouTube. There is a newsletter, purpleinsider.football, that people should go check out. And yours is capandtrade.football as well.
Yes,
So
gotta use those custom domains.
for certain social media purposes, to make it actually show up and look like an article. But that's not what anybody's here to hear about. It's the salary cap. So listen, there's a lot of different issues with the Vikings because they've created a ton of cap space for themselves, but they also have a lot of different players that they need to re-sign or that they need to go in free agency and get to fill spots. And the biggest issue is surrounding Sam Darnold. So something that is talked about a lot for Sam Darnold is the franchise tag. And I think that's a really good place to start because there's differing opinions on whether the Vikings should franchise tag Sam Darnold or not. In my opinion, Troy, I think that they should because they should have interest from the outside world to trade for Sam Darnold. But then the transition tag gets tossed around. Where do you stand on this of how they should handle Darnold? Because they can let him just walk. They can transition tag him. They can franchise tag and trade him. Or they could do some combination of that, sign him to a contract and keep him. There's so many different ways that they could go with the Sam Darnold decision.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting decision point coming up for the team here. And there's definitely, like you said, there's definitely multiple paths they can take on this. The franchise tag, like we say, if they apply that, other teams can negotiate with Darnold, but if they were to sign him to an offer sheet, it would take 2 first-round picks to get out of it, which probably seems a little bit unlikely from that perspective. So maybe it's like we've seen it like last year with the Chiefs with L'Jarius Sneed. You do the tag, trade him for whatever, maybe a second or third rounder, and then the new team signs him to a new contract. So that's definitely one path. It takes a little bit more money up front. The franchise tag is lower. Still don't have an official number, but upwards of 40, 41, $42 million. The transition tag works a little bit different, and that's definitely a path where I think the team should really look at. There is no compensation back if a team matches, but it allows Darnold to go see the market, and it allows the Vikings the right to match any contract that he signs. So maybe Darnold has a specific number in mind, goes to the market and realizes that number is not there and gets a lower offer sheet. And it's a number that the Vikings are willing to take on and re-sign him and retain him and just move forward about their day. So I think the transition tag probably makes the most sense in my mind. The trading on the franchise tag, teams have done it. I don't think it's a philosophically, I disagree with it because there's some language in the CBA that says that you're supposed to negotiate fairly in good faith if you put somebody on the franchise tag, but that seems to kind of go out the window. I know the Vikings are a pretty straightforward organization above a majority of the teams out there, but the transition tag would probably be option one, letting him walk. But the letting him walk thing, I don't know if that's a really optimal path because I think a lot of folks will just naturally assume you're going to get a compensatory pick for him. But we see the Vikings have quite a bit of cap space. Now, yes, they do have a lot of players to retain, but all it takes is one big signing from an external player, and you're canceling out Sam Darnold, and you're getting nothing at all. So Do you want to dabble with the tag and try to get a day two pick out of him? Maybe that makes sense, but I think the transition tag, let him see the market, let him seek his own value, try to match it. If it's not what a match, then that's the only backdraw with that one. There's no draft compensation back on that as well. So it's just a really sharp short edge to kind of tread there, and hopefully the Vikings can kind of get a sense of where things are settling once they get back from the combine, where there's no negotiations there at all whatsoever. And maybe they'll have a little better idea of what's going on with Sam Darnold after the combine. But that's probably the three paths that are available to the team.
Yeah, I mean, when I see those executives talking to each other at 2 o'clock in the morning out at different restaurants, I'm sure that they're talking about their golf games, where they want to play when they go on vacation later in the summer, and nothing about their teams at all. Now, let's kind of go through those a little bit one by one, because you mentioned, the franchise tag and trade has been done a number of times. The last time it happened with a quarterback was Matt Castle, who did briefly play for the Vikings, but he went from the Patriots to the Kansas City Chiefs. That's kind of all we have to work with in terms of a value. And they got a second round pick back. I think that would be phenomenal for the Vikings, but there's some issues there. I mean, that's if they are done with Darnold, they're good with moving on with JJ McCarthy. They don't want Sam Darnold back at all. Then you can franchise tag and trade. The only concern a little bit there is if there's any delay in trading him, getting him from one team to the next, any negotiation there, you could get into free agency and then not have that cap space, which I think a timing issue with that. And how long do you have to have some sort of bidding war with him? It can be just a little bit tricky there. I think if they franchise tag him, it's a pretty sure shot that they have a trade set up for when it's ready to go,
Yeah.
because they don't want to get caught holding the bag. Let's say that they do, though. Let's say that they do get caught with, we franchise tagged him with the idea to trade him, but then trades fell through. Teams got other ideas, and you're stuck with him. I mean, this would even apply to the transition tag. Let's say nobody gives him the offer, and you have him at either, I think the transition is expected to be somewhere 35 million, 36 million. That's still a huge amount of cap space. How would the Vikings go about working around that if he did come back on one of those franchise tags? Because I think this is the biggest fear of Vikings fans, aside from Darnold in the playoffs doing what he did. But if he were to come back, they went through many years of Kirk Cousins making too much money to spend a lot in free agency. How would the Vikings go about dealing with a big cap hit for Sam Darnold for the next season?
Yeah, I guess it kind of depends on the mindset of the team. If they're fine with just trying to swallow that 1 year deal and then reevaluate after the season, then yes, you can take that 40 million through free agency. It eats into the 50 something million that the team has right now. At that point, you're probably going to have to start, maybe have to do a few restructures with maybe Jonathan Grenard or Hawkinson, O'Neal, players like that. Andrew Van Ginkel, you start pulling in some of those levers just to free up some cap dollars, defer them to the future, which is not too big of an issue in my eyes, with the salary cap continuing to grow year over year. So those are some of the levers, the easy levers that you can pull with the basic restructures. If the team was more, now they know that, okay, nobody is willing to let's say they did the transition tag. Okay, now we know nobody was willing to put an offer sheet on him. That tells us the market is quite a bit lower. Maybe we can work out a 2 or 3 year contract that'll give him similar types of money, but we can structure it in a way that benefits the team's salary cap wise. So yeah, he would be due 35 million on the transition tag, but maybe we can negotiate a new contract where he still gets that 35 million, but it's structured in a way where the cap hit is only 12 or 13 million dollars this year, and you're saving 20 million on that extension while still having a similar type of cash outlay on the player. So that would probably be the most optimum path for them. But if they needed to swallow it, they could just probably pull some levers that they have available to free up some cap dollars to push forward.
I don't know about you guys, but I tend to have an impulse buy problem. I'm always signing up for stuff and then forgetting about it, and then I end up getting charged month after month. Well, it turns out that I am not alone. In fact, I just learned that 85% of people have at least one paid subscription going unused each month. Thanks to Rocket Money, though, I now can see all of my subscriptions in one place and cancel the ones that I am not using anymore. And now, folks, I am saving money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Rocket Money has over 5 million users that have saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions, reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/Purple Insider. That is rocketmoney.com/Purple Insider today. Okay, if they were to transition tag him, that would also be a sign to me, just trying to read tea leaves on each different move, right?
Yeah.
That they want somebody else to come make that offer, so they have the option to decide if they like that offer or not. And this would actually be in line with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and how he's done business, you cover the Texans. So, with Danielle Hunter, they had a line in the sand with Danielle Hunter where they said, we love you and think you're an awesome football player, as you saw. But also at 20, I think he made 28 a year. That's just too much for what we want to do at that position. They swapped edge rushers and it worked out wonderfully for everybody.
Yep.
But they just had not that high of a number on a guy who had neck injury and maybe at least when he was here with Brian Flores, it's not exactly the fit they're looking for. They want somebody who could drop back in coverage and things like that. And then they let him move on. And even with Kirk Cousins last year, I am certain that they had a number on Kirk Cousins. And they said, if they go over that number, then you're not coming back as our bridge quarterback to the next guy. I wonder what that number would be, though, for the Vikings. Because to me, if they transition tag him, it means let's see what somebody puts out on him. And if it's a bigger number than we want, then we're going to let him walk. But I'm very curious about what the number would be that he would get on the transition tag. What I've had in my head is 3 years, 120 million with something like 60 or 70 million guaranteed. But I think it's really fascinating to try to weigh the market, because did he actually lose money on those last two games? Are the Raiders or the Giants or some team like that really desperate? I don't have a great feel for it, because I think that there's enough teams that really want him that somebody might go crazy with an offer.
Yeah, I think this draft class might benefit him a little bit with the weak class. And as always, there's just a lack of any kind of quarterback talent in free agency. So I'm not sure that I can quite get in line with the $40 million deal, $40 million a year deal. I would probably look more in the Baker Mayfield, Derek Carr type area, in that 30 to 35. Take your structure of 3 years, 95, 100 million with 50 to 60 million guaranteed might be something I think the market might see him as. I don't know if that's specifically built around the idea that he cost himself money in the last 2 years. From my outside perspective, I feel like I would look at Darnold as, okay, he excelled in this specific system. Are those traits and that kind of output and performance going to carry over into my system, whatever my system may be? And if it's not a similar system that Kevin O'Connell has shown, then is it going to carry over? And that would probably be one of my concerns as another team. But if you're running a similar system, then you probably have a little more comfort level with bringing him in. So it kind of just depends on what other teams are looking like out there and it scheme they're running versus what kind of cash outlay they're willing to put in. Because we know like certain teams may not be as cash heavy as some other teams. So it's a lot of factors in there, but that's kind of where I would think the market might settle in, as maybe a little under, maybe that mid, 35, $33 million per year. And I think a 3-year deal makes a lot of sense for everybody. Darnold is still young by all accounts, despite the number of years he's been in this league. So that would give him a chance to see the market again relatively quickly. That would be my kind of viewpoint from an outsider's perspective.
Yeah, the one thing that I kind of keep coming back to is just how much Atlanta paid for Kirk last year. And I think about all the reasons there were not to pay Kirk Cousins. I mean, he was coming off an Achilles. He has one playoff win in his career. The Vikings had paid him a bunch of money and never been able to work around it. And still, they went nuts with $45 million a year and 100 guaranteed over 4 years. And here's how I always think of things is through the owner's eyeballs. And we know Arthur Blank on the older side wanted to get back to the playoffs. Well, the Vegas Raiders, I mean, their owner cannot be happy with what are we on? 22 years without a playoff win. And
Yeah.
then in New York, their owner is telling their GM and their head coach, yeah, you guys are on the hot seat. So good luck this offseason. I mean, that to me screams like, okay, we've got to outbid somebody for Sam Darnold. What do you make? You referenced it, but the rest of the market for quarterbacks, Daniel Jeremiah was kind of hinting on the internet today that he thinks Matt Stafford is going to be gone. That's weird to me because they just came close to beating the Eagles, who won the Super Bowl. And I'm not sure if you want to get rid of your quarterback at that point, but maybe they've got another option like Sam Darnold if they think that he could step in. I think aside from that, though, it's very interesting because it's like, what's the best, worst option? Is someone going to pay Daniel Jones? I saw that's rumored today. Is Russell Wilson playing in the league? Is Justin Fields? Like, how do you weigh what all of that means to Sam Darnold?
Well, I think with Darnold, you have an established performance, especially with 2024. Those other players that are mentioned with him don't have the repertoire, the performance outlay that was shown in recent history compared to those other players. So I think that puts Darnold a step above with those other players, let alone age and just what they've done in the league so far. But I agree with you that all it takes is two teams to ruin the negotiations, and all of a sudden you're getting a 10% spike on this player's value, and they're just trying to outbid each other. And next thing you know, you're paying Sam Darnold $45 million like Kirk Cousins. Now, I will say Kirk Cousins has a fantastic agent who is just very good, and Kirk Cousins. I try to get off on a tangent. Kirk Cousins is going to go down in the Hall of Fame of contracts.
Yes.
But I think yeah, it takes just two teams. There are some teams that are on the hot seat with their front offices, but I feel like there's such a gap in quarterback contracts. It's all the guys that are in 60 down to 45 million. Then there's like 2 to 3 guys in that $30 million range, and then it drops down to the backups at 12. So is he in that $30 million range? Just have to wait and see how the market shakes out. I could be completely off on this, but that's just kind of my valuation on him. Now that is a evaluation without discussing with other people on what the market thinks of him. And so, yeah, it could easily, another team just could be raring to go and will be happy to offer him a 3-year, $120 million deal. And it wouldn't even surprise me in the least bit if that happened. So this is probably one of the more fascinating specific players because we just don't see quarterbacks like this hit the market. We just don't. And so I'm really fascinated to see how this just plays out between how the Vikings handle it, what the market and how they view Sam Darnold, and how it just all shakes out here in the next 3 or 4 weeks.
And because the Vikings under this management have not leaked stuff in these types of negotiations, I'm sure you noticed during Justin Jefferson, I have a saying on the show, we all find out together with this leadership, because we walked into a press conference one day and they were like, oh yeah, guys, we extended TJ Hawkinson. We're like, oh, okay. Because they just don't put it out there for the insiders. So you have Lock on Forest saying, hey, they might actually want him back. And then you have Jeremy Fowler saying, well, they might use the transition tag. And at some point we get to, well, they might anything at this point. And what it really comes down to is how comfortable they are with where JJ McCarthy stands.
Yeah.
Because, and this is the next scenario I want to talk with you about, and it's the most exciting one for all the Vikings fans, which is if Darnold goes one way or the other, let's say they trade him for that second round pick,
Right.
and the Vikings then, recoup some serious draft capital. You're feeling better about the draft, and you have 50 something million dollars to work with. At the same time, they have a lot of things to do. So I want to talk about different markets for positions, because this is something I've been putting some effort into. The offensive line market and the defensive tackle market, I think, got a little bit of a boost themselves by the Super Bowl, because you can interpret that both ways. One, wow, it's great to have a defensive tackle who can go murder people. And two, you better have the offensive line, otherwise you're going to get murdered, right? And yet I look at both markets as being unimpressive in free agency. And I think that the guys like Milton Williams and Osa Odigizua are about to get wildly overpaid. Let's start there with the DTs. What is your assessment on that? Because I think the Vikings should play the defensive tackle a little carefully here. Milton Williams was playing next to Jalen Carter, one of the best D lines. Like, there's a lot to kind of bolster his production. He only played like 500 snaps. I think that is the position that gets the most overpaid in the NFL free agency this year.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Just from the free agency as a whole is pretty weak this year, and the defensive tackle group has three players between Osa, Dallas, Milton Williams, and Levi from Detroit. I think those three players are going to earn the biggest contracts out there, and Milton Williams, like you said, he played next to some fantastic players. So you have to like look at that and put that in as part of your evaluation. Was he playing as good as he was because he was next to fantastic players, or is it really derivative of his own work? And that'll be. I think his valuation across the league is going to be wildly different from team to team, especially depending on the scheme that you use. And trust me, I'm looking at defensive tackles too, because Houston needs a big defensive tackle in there. The only reason why I flinch a little bit at thinking the defensive tackles might get overpaid is the defensive tackle group in the draft class sounds like it's a pretty strong group. So could that drive down some of their potential valuations? Maybe. It's hard to say, but I think that's going to be an interesting group to watch. But I think Milton Williams, of the three players, I think he's on that Javon Hargrave path where he's going to get a lot of money, and I think a team might regret it a couple of years into the deal. So, in free agency, it's rare that you get any kind of surplus value in free agency anyway. So that would kind of be my read on the situation with those specific players. What they're going to get, I mean, that part is going to be a little more tricky. It could be upwards. Do they clip the $20 million mark? Probably. In some aspect, they probably will. The whole defensive tackle interior offensive line markets have shifted upwards together, and for good reason. As you see players on the interior defensive line making more and more money, teams are having to compensate by signing guards and centers to more and more money to guard those guys, because their teams are starting to find ways to get pressure on the quarterback from the interior versus the high priced edge players. But you got players that are in Dexter Lawrence at 22, Leonard Williams at 21, DeForest Buckner at 23, Daron Payne, who played off the tag last time, 22.5. I think that's probably the market that those kind of players are going to settle in. And you're not going to get surplus value on free agency, but teams just know that it's just a cost of doing business. When you sign a free agent, you're going to pay top dollar for probably 80% of the return.
Well, and that's the thing, that when we talk about the draft, so often when we discuss drafting a wide receiver, an edge rusher, a tackle, part of the conversation is if you hit on that guy, you get 4 years of him making a small amount of money. And we only ever discuss this with quarterbacks, but it actually matters across the roster. If you draft a star at those positions, how about Will Anderson? My goodness, what's his real value versus what they've had to pay him? over the last couple of years, or even a Jordan Addison. If Jordan Addison was in free agency right now, someone's paying him what, like $18 million a year for 900 yards receiving, but instead, rookie contract. So that number going up for DTs makes it a much better play. Because if the Vikings draft one at 24 and the guy turns out to be a star, then you're talking about surplus value of 16, 17, 18 million dollars over what that guy would make in free agency. That was not the case even just a couple of years ago, that there were so many guys like that. On the guard side, I have leaned toward everyone wants Trey Smith. Of course they do. Why wouldn't you want Trey Smith? He's a great player. I've leaned toward the side of not looking at one $20+ million guard if he even hits the market. We don't even know if he's going to. If he hits the market, I think that one's risky. He's playing for the Chiefs. They've had a really good interior line altogether. He's got the best quarterback. They get rid of the football quickly, and he's going to cost so much more because he plays for the Chiefs than all the other guards. And I'm not totally convinced based on the numbers that the difference between him and some of the other second tier guys is $10 million. I think with those guards, it's kind of been like the Robert Hunts are getting overpaid, the Jonah Jacksons overpaid. I think that's fine because the DTs are killing everybody, but I also think that some teams are wildly overpaying for players that are not wildly better than the next best group, if that makes sense.
No, you're spot on. The offensive line in Houston's been in shambles for the past probably 2 years now, and there's a lot of money sunk into that line, and there's a lot of fans here in Houston that want a high price offensive guard, and I want nothing to do with Trey Smith. That I think that would probably just be a huge. He's probably going to reset the market at guard, and I don't want to be the team that's paying him that amount of money and probably not even get close to that return. So I think in the guard market, there is some value to be had. I think, and once you drop down a tier and you get into the James Daniels, Mekhi, Becton, if you want to go a little bit older, Brandon Sheriff or Kevin Zeitler, if you just need a 1 year kind of a stopgap kind of situation. I do like some of the value with, Makari out of Baltimore and Meredith out of Las Vegas. I really think this is probably going to be the position group where teams can strategically spend $7, $8, $9 million on a player and get that plus a little bit more in return versus going for the $20+ million Trey Smith. I think there is just a good handful of guards, interior offensive line players. There's probably about 6 or 7 of them in there that I think you can find probably on 75 cents on the dollar and probably get $1 back in return.
I totally agree, and I feel like this is the exact way the Vikings should go with that position. And also, guard in the draft in the back end of the first round might be a good place to go with that as well. And if you're going to, the Vikings really need 2, possibly 3 new interior offensive linemen, especially with the way Kevin O'Connell wants to play with downfield routes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to do that, putting it all into one guy and then patchworking the other position still leaves other teams the ability to just attack where your weakness is. And we've seen them do that for years with the Vikings. Even when Dalton Reisner was playing fine in pass protection on the right side, they're just sending all their stuff to the left side. And that doesn't really solve the problem. You need to prevent pressure. And just a small comment, having seen the Vikings play the Texans, it blew my mind that they still were falling for the same stuff in week, what was it, 3 that they played the Texans? Same stuff in the playoffs. The same blitzes, the same stunts. And it's like, I think maybe offensive line coach could be as valuable of a position for the Texans, but that's just my take from the outside.
You're
But
preaching to the choir there. We're hoping Nick Caley will bring over some new protection rules that the former offensive coordinator didn't have. And to me, it can't get any worse. I say that, but hopefully that's not the case. But yeah, I think you're on the right path there. I think you can find a good guard or even a center for that matter. There's 2 or 3 centers out there if you need a center. I don't think y'all need a center, but there's there's some good interior offensive line. We'll just keep it at interior offensive line. There's a good group of free agent value there. There's a good batch of draft guys on day 2, early day 3 that you could come out of free agency and draft with probably 3 solid players to fill probably 2 holes and have a good swing option behind them that can continue to develop up. And so I think that's because I'm on the same path there. We need that here. So I think I think you're right on it there, Matthew. I think that's the way to look at this.
A little bit of the problem is you and I could also grab like 10 other podcasters who cover other teams and they'd be like, yeah, we need guards.
Everybody, their offensive line is shortage across the league. Everybody's looking for offensive line, and that's why you rarely see anything in free agency. That's why the free agency group, I think Trey Smith is hitting because KC's got a lot of money wrapped up. KC generally is not big spenders in free agency. They're good at retaining their own talent, but at some point, I think they even know that what it's going to take to keep Trey Smith just doesn't make sense.
Right, exactly. I like going through these positions here because they're all so interesting and have different dynamics. And the Vikings have free agents in all of them. How about running back? Last year, I think, is a total anomaly. Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley, these Hall of Fame talent players, both hitting the market at the same time. Somehow the league doesn't value them that much and doesn't give them great contracts, which I guess I understand when you look at yards per carry is such a deceiving and strange statistic because Saquon Barkley goes and almost doubles his playing with way better everything. And it just tells you that the running back only has so much control over what's happening. Yet at the same time, if you get a freakish talent with everything in front of them, oh my gosh, you're talking about legendary type of seasons. And that's what we saw from Henry, and that's what we saw from Barkley. But this running back market does not have that. I'm a little intrigued by Rico Dowdle. I'm a little intrigued by J.K. Dobbins. And that ends the list of people that I'm interested in for the Vikings. So now here's Aaron Jones. Last year, Aaron Jones is buried in this free agent class, and Joe Mixon got moved as well. And so he gets a very small contract for a guy with his track record and his performance in the playoffs. Then he carries the ball a gazillion times, has his second highest yards from scrimmage of his career, but he's also of an age that is terrifying to even bring a guy back on a 1-year contract. Where do you see Aaron Jones fitting in here? Because I could also see now everyone's talking about, hey, you got to run the ball, and this top running team wins the Super Bowl. I could also see a lot of other teams saying, we're kind of screwed in the backfield, like Denver. We will pay you more based on what you just did than the Vikings. I also think he wants to come back to the Vikings. I just think that he has this distinct advantage this year in free agency that he did not have last year.
Yeah, I feel like this free agency class, it can almost include Aaron Jones in this comment, where it feels like it's a bunch of RB2s out there. And we'll kind of split this in two things here. So I think the running back contract market, the value market's just kind of risen over the last couple of years. I feel like it's just because we see so much cover 2 out there, got less players in the box. It's just a slow transition. Whereas like 4 or 5 years ago, the whole nomenclature of running backs don't matter, blah, 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 is because teams were loading boxes and you can only do so much with your running game. And now that teams have transitioned back to having another safety back deep, one less player in the box, running backs are starting to have a little more success. Plus you're starting to see, I think the linebacker size in general is just smaller than it was 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I think all that kind of brings it together why running backs have a little more success. So therefore contracts are coming back up in line a little bit. They're not where they need to be. They never will be, but they're getting better. And Aaron Jones, like you talked about, 31, I think he's 31 right now. So I think there is some running back talent in the draft as well. But we saw the news that Minnesota and Aaron Jones were able to push back the void date on his contract back to the day before the league year starts. So that put his void date, I think, on March 11th. So to me, that tells me they're getting closer to a number that they like. I know they did that last year with the defensive tackle, and so maybe that they're getting to a number where they're like. What that number would be, I feel like that APY of 7 million that he was at this past year probably makes pretty good sense going forward. I think it's just more of a give you a little more guarantee, 2-year structure. It's going to be a fully guaranteed first year. We might have a small guarantee in the second year just to give you some protection beyond that. But maybe it's that 2-year, $15 million type deal with, $7 or $8 million guaranteed. On his previous contract, it was 7 million, but that was fully guaranteed on a 1-year deal. They added the 4 void years for salary cap purposes. So they do have the room to, work with the confines of the contract structure that's already there. So I can see it making sense that he is brought back by them. And 31 out on the open market, I think he's probably gonna have a better market with Minnesota than he would outside. So that's what makes me kind of put all that stuff together. It looks like there's a good chance that he remains in Minnesota.
I do think it makes a lot of sense for both sides. I
Yep.
mean, even if you're Aaron Jones, you probably would welcome the idea of the Vikings drafting a middle round running back and mixing and matching a little bit more. I mean, he took a whooping last year. And
Yeah.
if you're the Vikings, when you look around, you go, well, who is a better option? Is Khalil Herbert a better option or somebody down the list? Probably not. And then you bring the leadership element, the chemistry element. You just have to have another option of somebody who's a little more explosive at this point in their career, because Aaron Jones did not rip off a lot of big runs last year. I think he had a good season. They also refused to use him in any short yardage, which helped his yards per carry. That's why that stat can be so goofy. It's like Jerome Bettis' career yards per carry is 3.8 or 3.9. How many times do you think he ran at the goal line? How many times do you think he ran on 3rd and 1? Every time. So if you never have those, it makes you look a little better than maybe you were. I think that that's a type of player that I would be very concerned about bringing back because of the age, but I get it if you're pairing it with somebody else. I can't come up with something better. I kind of like Dowdle a little better because he's got no mileage, but you
Yep.
also don't know the guy, what he brings to the locker room, how he's going to fit with what you want to do, whereas you really know Aaron Jones. Now, the corner, I want to talk about the corners because they did the same thing
Yep.
with Byron Murphy where they moved that date back. And maybe you can explain that a little more before we dive into it, like what exactly that means. Because in both podcasts, I tried to explain it. I feel like I bumbled through it a little bit. To me, it just is the big takeaway is it's a sign that they want to work with the guy. And let's not worry too much about the other details, but that's why you're here, is to worry about the other details. So explain what it means with Byron Murphy that they move that void date back.
Yeah, so he originally had a void date of it's the classic 23rd day before the new league year starts. So it's always that is always the day before the franchise tag window opens. So his 23rd day was Monday, February 17th. The contract would have voided out on that day. We didn't learn about the void date moving until today because the league office was closed yesterday or closed on Monday for President's Day, so things kind of leaked out a day later. But so essentially, they moved that date back. They agreed to move that date back to March 11th, and it keeps all the future proration in place. His deal would have had all that money. I think it was 4.2 million in prorated money in 2025 through 2027 would have accelerated up into the 2025 league year. Now, with that void date pushed back, those $1.4 million per year over the next 3 years of prorated signing bonus money will stay in place if they sign a new deal versus having all that money lump up into the immediate cap year. So it saves them some cap dollars from that perspective if they are able to work out an extension. If they are not, then the same thing will happen come March 11th. That money accelerate forward. He'll become an unrestricted free agent, able to sign with a new team come March 12th. So I think it's kind of the same situation that we talked about with Aaron Jones, where if they're moving that back, then it gives the impression that the two sides are pretty close to a deal. The cornerback market is not as bad this year. We've got Carlton Davis out there, Travarius Ward, if he's still looking to play. I know he just wants to get out of San Francisco altogether. Um, Kendall Fuller, DJ Reed, these are all decent players. I know Stephon Gilmore, who's the ageless wonder. I don't know if he's going to continue playing or not, but there are a few decent cornerback two type players out there. I think Byron Murphy's probably one of the top 3 cornerbacks available on the market. So what does that mean for his actual value going in? I don't think the draft class looks that great this year, so I think that favors Murphy quite a bit. I think he could easily get up over 17, $18 million a year, approaching. I don't know if he gets all the way to 20, but I could definitely see him in that Jalen Johnson, L'Jarius Sneed, Tyson Campbell type range, in that $19 million a year type arena.
Which to me is just too much. And this is as a Byron Murphy Jr. enjoyer. I mean, I think that he's really good. And I think he's been a great fit with Brian Flores. He made plays on the football last year. 6 interceptions is hard to repeat, though, from year in and year out. And you're just talking about such a big investment on another one of those weak link type of positions where they have Mekhi Blackman coming back after an ACL injury and they're empty. They have nothing else. So do you sign? It's very similar to the guard thing where it's like, do you sign several players who you think could be good, or even put your money into someone like DJ Reed, who I think has a larger track record of being the guy than Byron Murphy, who it was really the last 2 years, but this is the best year of his career he's coming off of, which is always a dangerous time to invest so much in a player. Now, if you're New England, if you're the Raiders, if you're one of these teams that stinks and just needs dudes somewhere, okay, overpay. It was like
Yeah.
when the Jags, everyone freaked out when the Jags paid Christian Kirk a bunch of money. It was like, guys, they don't have any players.
Yeah.
Like they're going to have to pay somebody to come there. Somebody's going to do that for Byron Murphy, I feel like. And I think that should price out the Vikings a little bit. And it is interesting. I just as a little side stop off here, the conversation, the void years discussion gets bounced around a lot with us in these off seasons because the Vikings had to do a lot of this to make it work as they were cleaning up the Rick Spielman mess from the previous. That's how they made $71 million in dead cap actually work for this year and signed Grenard, signed Cashman, etc. But in the future, I'm not sure how much of that they want to do. Like they've sort of moved past that and avoided it for a lot of the current players. We see Murphy is a little bit like that. Aaron Jones a little bit like that. There's a little bit of that in Sam Darnold. But can you explain like why teams do that other than just a cheat? Because I feel like I've treated it as I hate when they do it because that means it's going to screw you down the line. But it doesn't it's kind of like borrowing against the future, but you get interest in a way too. So it comes up a lot. I'd love you to explain how it works.
Yeah, to me, I would look at it more as a cap dollar, and today is worth less than it is in the future. It's actually in my video series. I've got one on void years coming up here, probably in about 4 or 5 days, and I have an example where the team creates almost $1 million in cap space just by using that that mechanism of the void years. But you just got to be careful with it. Like you said, you can't turn into the New Orleans Saints where you're pushing so much money out that you got to the point where you just have no roster flexibility when it comes to your salary cap. So I think they're fine to use in specific cases when it makes sense, and then you can also build off of those and use June 1 designations. That's what the Eagles are really good about doing, is building that structure into those kind of situations. But it's just a way of deferring money to future years, and you're hedging against a rising salary cap. So if I can push $10 million of cap dollars into the next year, so $10 million is whatever percentage that is of the cap, 2.5% this year. Next year, it's only going to be 2.1% of the salary cap. So that's where you find that hidden value and the rising salary cap. But I agree with you. I don't think you just need to keep swiping that credit card at the machine over and over and over. And next thing you know, you've got 8 or 9 players with 78, 70, $80 million of dead money that are not going to be in your roster anymore. I think those are for extreme situations, teams that are just trying to make a swing. But I think the Vikings, the Quessy did a fantastic job of cleaning up and getting this team back exactly where they need to be. There's a lot of cap space this year. There's a lot of open cap space in the coming years. Now, like you mentioned before, there are some players that they need to re-sign, but at least at this point now they can be more targeted type players. They know that I can spend this money on this player, but if I really need this player and the numbers make sense and that player comes available, or a player in a trade situation comes available in free agency that a team is looking to get out away from because they're cap strapped or anything, that it just maybe they had a scheme change and this specific player is making a lot of money and doesn't make sense for their roster. Now we have room to take those kind of moves on. Whereas before, when we don't have the cap space, we're having to only take on specific, very specific players. So I think you're in a good situation, but I think going back to your original question, void years are good in certain situations. They're good when you need to use them on a specific player that you know that you can defer that money, that you already know that that player is not going to be here next year. That's where I think the biggest thing is more often than not, teams will do it when they know that player is just going to be a 1-year deal, and we're willing as an organization to just deal with that money in the future, and teams are happy to do that. Surprisingly, it kind of shocks me how often teams are just like, push off in the future. We'll deal with that next year. And, Houston's done it just as much as well as any other team. So they got popped with it on the Dalton Schultz contract last year. They let the void hit, still signed him to an extension. And now they had all that accelerated void money plus his new contract all in 1 year. It was kind of a mess, but I think the way Minnesota's approached it is what you want to do is just here or there, use it sparingly, don't get too much in bed with it, and then I think it becomes a tool for you to use to strategically place cap dollars where you need it. Because at the end of the day, the salary cap, in my mind, is just an accounting function. It's an accounting function of the cash that a team spends. So if you're able to know and place and say, I can place $8 million here, $6 million in the future on this player, $15 million here, and strategically place money where I know I can budget around it because of my position groups and what the future holds based on my forecast for free agency and draft beyond this year, then that's where it kind of starts putting those puzzle pieces together.
Yeah, and I think about the timelines, and you're always trying to work with them when it comes to stuff like that. So, just for example, let's just say that they had gotten 2 playoff wins out of Sam Darnold, and then they had to re-sign him. Well, at that point, you're Super Bowl or bust. So you're going into free agency just saying void year till we're dead. I mean, that's really Philadelphia. It's almost comical. Like when you look at Jalen Hurts' salary cap page on Over the Cap, you just start laughing. Oh, okay, this is insane how they've set this up. But they knew this is our window. This is our chance to win a Super Bowl with him. So his cap hit is low for this year, and it's not bad for next year. And then they're going to have to deal with some serious issues down the road. But who cares? They got their ring. And I think the Vikings can, at this point, think we don't have to do that right now. But if J.J. McCarthy turns out to be a superstar, and then you have to pay him, then you're in a winning window, and then you start doing stuff like that. So I think that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah does not quite get enough credit for this. Mm-hmm. I mean, he gets credit for the free agent signings, and that's kind of a total team effort. But tearing down that salary cap issues, the issues they had before, was a nightmare for them. I mean, it was such a disaster because the previous regime was desperate, and they knew they were getting fired if they didn't make the playoffs. So they just say, who cares? This is going to be someone else's problem. And that was Kwesi's problem for 3 years here to get to this point. So anyway, One more position group to touch on
Mhm.
with you, and I really appreciate all the time and all
Yeah,
the
yeah.
explanations. It's fantastic. That's the safety spot. And this is another situation where when you win 14 and the team all likes each other and everybody is buddies and they like guys in the locker room, that sometimes you're the one that's going to overpay. And this is Cam Bynum for me. Cam Bynum is a really good player. I can't praise him enough, but everybody has a dollar figure. And when I look at the safeties, I see 5, 6, 7 players that I would take on the Vikings based on their histories. Justin Blackmon is a guy that I would take from Indianapolis. Justin
Mhm.
Reed, Trayvon Morig, I've mentioned on the show, as a guy who's a needle mover. Javon Holland is somebody that Brian Flores drafted and might love as like the next type of Harrison Smith player. I think that loyalty should only go so far in this business. And with Cam Bynum, if someone else wants to give him 15 plus, they should probably let them do that and just let him be happy with his tons of money and move on. To me, I don't know how you view this. Maybe his number gets driven down because there are other safeties. I think that he's a guy you have to really draw a line in the sand with because there's so many potential options that could bring a little bit more to the table.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a little bit of a return renaissance for the safety free agency group, especially after what we've seen the last 2 years. I think Bynum, I'm pretty much in agreement with you. I think that's going to be a player that you're fine to let walk for $15 million a year, and then go back and look in the market and find, you know, whether it's Mooring out of Vegas, like you mentioned, Justin Reed, uh, Hufanga out of San Francisco can make sense in certain situations. So I think there's, even if you need a box safety like Jeremy Chin or a stopgap like Justin Simmons, I mean, I think, and Justin Blackman, I think, is another option that you mentioned. I don't know if you want to get into the Javon Hollins sweepstakes. I think he's going to probably take a shot at the top of the market. But there's also some, you know, I think it's a very solid safety group, and I'm with you. You let Bynum walk. I don't know that you want to get in bed with him for that much money and just take that money and reassess it and redistribute it around the roster, whether it's another safety at that similar price point or bringing in a safety at a lower price point and redistribute some of that money across the way. Um, I'm with you there on his market. I do think he's going to see a pretty decent market. Just his volatility and performance year over year is probably going to be my biggest concern for him. Even though he's still young, he's 26 years old. That's the sweet spot for those skill players like that. But I'm with you there for sure.
I think if a guy is going at that position 15 plus, then you have to be a difference maker, as in you are the reason that the needle moves. And if you're comparing Javon Holland at 20, Cam Bynum at 15, that is an easy choice for me. I'm going Holland.
Yeah.
I think he is that type of player. And if they lose Harrison Smith, then they have to go into free agency looking for someone who's a difference maker like Harrison Smith has been for so long, and not necessarily. And again, I don't ever want to insult Cam Bynum. He is just such a great person and
Yeah.
player for this team. So I just
At
always
the end
want to
of the
make
day,
sure
it's a
that's clear.
business. I
Right.
hate to say it. Yeah.
Right. He's a sidecar type of player. He's a deep safety that is going to succeed or fail based on what's going on around him more than he is going to be the reason your defense succeeds or fails. That position kind of works that way. See Anthony Harris from a few years ago. Anthony Harris is franchise tagged, and 2 years later, he's out of the league.
Talk about, I know that was a wild one, man. Franchise tag and then was like getting just 1 year prove it deals and then just disappeared. That was wild. Yeah.
That's what it means to play next to 22.
Yeah.
Because I mean, through his career,
Mm.
he played next to, I think, might have been Robert Blanton early on, and then it was Andrew Sandejo, UDFA, who is a good player, but again, like this is an maybe a late round pick, played in the UFL or a UDFA for them, but a signing to be a special teamer. And then his job ends up being taken by Anthony Harris, who was a special teamer, UDFA. And then Cam Bynum comes in as a cornerback who moves to safety and takes the job and has been really good. I mean, I think that, the borderline Hall of Fame player next to those guys has had a lot to do with it. So in this case, they might lose that player and they might need another needle mover. And that's kind of the way that I've looked at that. Before we wrap up, these have been awesome conversations. And I know that all Vikings fans have really wanted like deep dives into free agent markets. I just want to know your number one storyline that you're looking at. Player, situation, team. Doesn't have to have anything to do with the Vikings. Let's just Sam Darnold should be at the top of the discussion. Let's move. We talked a lot of Sam Darnold. Let's move that off the table. What else in the league is like the biggest thing that throughout your day you're finding yourself thinking about going into this big time off-season stuff?
I'm curious to see how this wide receiver market shakes out. There's a few names out there, and I'm really curious to see what Cincinnati does as a whole. That that team has been very stubborn with their contract structures. They beyond Joe Burrow, they don't guarantee money beyond the first year. They do a roster bonus in the second year. It's a very plain Jane contract structure mentality. Uh, they don't have as much cash as like the Philadelphias and Atlantas and the Rams of the world, but they have plenty to cover their needs. But how they handle the T. Higgins situation, Jamar Chase situation, got Joey Burrow on the radio and on air saying, giving out contract restructure recommendations and how to look at the Eagles and this is how we can do it. So I'm really curious. That's probably it's not really so much a free agency thing, but it's more so I just want to see how if Mike Brown and Duke Tobin are willing to get out of their comfort zone, do something a little different to try to keep this trio of fantastic players together. I think it can be done. I even think they can keep Trey Hendrickson if they just want to pay, like we talked about with the void years, and if they want to get into the option bonus game and start pushing some prorated money down the line and just really utilize Joey Burrow's prime years for the next 2 or 3 years, I think they can make it work. It might be a little painful come 28, 29, but that's probably going to be one of the more interesting things for me, just because it's a big thing with the salary cap and how they manage it, and see if they get a little outside of their comfort zone. I'm always year over year always fascinated to watch the Saints and that big old mess over there, just to see how they dig themselves out of the hole every year. Kai Harley, he does the salary cap over there. He's just a magician with this stuff, and it's just every year they're screwed. They're not going to be able to do anything, and then they find a way out, and we'll see what happens there. But I do kind of feel bad for Kellen Moore. I just feel like that's kind of I wouldn't have wanted to take that job. I'll say that. I just feel like that's a placeholder job for somebody else once they get it cleaned up. I really don't have too many other specific situations, outside of Houston. We've got a lot going on here. We went from having one of the better wide receiver rooms in the league to all of a sudden now we have almost nobody, because Stephon Diggs towards an ACL, Tank Dell's leg explodes, and I'm not even sure he's going to be able to play at all this year. So all of a sudden this team needs a wide receiver, and do they go out and spend money on like a Chris Godwin, or do they try to target this in the draft? Do they go low cost with DeMarcus Robinson? It just kind of curious to see how that plays out here in Houston, and of course how they manage the offensive line. There's some different decision points that Nick Caserio has ahead of him with there, but I mean they've done well in the draft. They had another fantastic draft this past year, and the draft's always going to be just one of the most exciting components of the offseason in general. I just this free agency as a whole, I don't think is very sexy. I don't think it's going to be a big exciting thing. There'll be a few players, but I don't know that we're going to see a lot of franchise tags. I think we might see more transition tags for once, which are rarely used. I think we might see a few transition tags here over the next 10 days or so. Maybe that'll include Sam Darnold, but that would probably be the few of my watching points. I really am fascinated to see how Cincinnati navigates this. And it sounds like they're going to franchise tag T. Higgins again. and try to buy themselves a little negotiating time for, which once you franchise tag a player, you have up until July 15th to negotiate a contract extension with that player. So they're just going to have some time to negotiate and try to work something out. I just really want to see if they get outside of their comfort zone and do something a little bit different. And
Well, they are on the Vikings schedule, so I
yeah,
have also been keeping track of this. You don't want to face T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. You'd much well, they are gonna franchise tag him. That's already been reported.
yeah,
So they're going to face T. Higgins more likely than not. But the rest of that roster, that defense is a mess,
yeah,
and they've got a lot to work with there. Cap and Trade is the Substack, capandtrade.football. Love
yeah,
that. And Cap and Trade on YouTube, Texans Cap on Twitter, and everyone already uses overthecap.com for
yeah.
absolutely everything. So we love overthecap.com here. And I loved this conversation. Troy Chapman, great job on your first run through Purple Insider here, but absolutely will not be the last.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming on, breaking it all down. And after the Vikings have a bunch of contracts to look at, we'll do it again. How about that?
Yeah, no. Anytime, man. Give me a shout. We'll chat it back up maybe after all the dust settles and see what Minnesota end up doing, because it's definitely going to be fascinating to watch to see how the team navigates free agency this year. They've got a lot of money that they can spend. It's just curious to see if they actually do spend a lot of money. Teams a little bit different. Cash spending is a little bit different. There's 3-year windows that they have to navigate through, and this is year 2 of the current 3-year spending window. So yeah, I'll be ready to come back whenever you're ready, man. I appreciate the time, appreciate all the information, and like I kind of mentioned at one point, the YouTube channel. I'm doing we're doing a NFL salary cap explained series. So we're just doing an episode at a time covering a different topic. That's probably end up being about a 20 video playlist when it's all said and done. I think tomorrow night I'm going to record episode 11 and 12. So, make sure everybody checks that out. And if you make it through, if you watch that whole playlist, you'll be able to understand probably 90% of what you read on social media, what you read and articles, and what you see when a player signs for this and dead money this and void year that. You'll have a better understanding of it all if you take a look at that playlist. I try to do it at a high level explanation, not try to get too far down in the weeds. There's examples in there. There's excerpts from actual player contracts, and uh, you know, encourage you to check it out, and we'll keep plugging along. But I appreciate it, Matt. I had a great time chatting with you, man. I enjoy all your work and look forward to doing it again.
And just let me sign off on the series, which was actually what inspired me to ask you to come on. So I should have mentioned that earlier. Again, Cap and Trade, the YouTube series on the salary cap, is for me fantastic. I know I have a lot of cap nerds and offseason nerds that love this show. So make sure you go check that out. It's a must. Thanks so much, Troy. And we'll talk to you all again soon. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.